Thanks, Ashton. I'm Becca, and I'm an alcoholic. And I appreciate you asking me to do this. Can you hear me? It says my connection's unstable. I'm good. Okay. So a lot of times with this, and I'll cover this, what it used to be like, what happened, what it's like now. But really, Pavillon, I owe my life to, because it helped me restart really my life. I went to early October of 2017. I stood at the turning point. And so I'll backtrack. I grew up in fairly normal, middle class background with outside of Charlotte. And, I took my first alcoholic drink when I was like 16, knowing full well that my grandfather died of the disease. But so that being said, I knew going into it that it was genetic. However, I did it anyway. And I remember my first encounter with alcohol. I had like 3 beers, and it changed I was very shy, and it kind of relieved that shyness and helped me, have a good time. So what I found out, and I didn't realize until I got sober and I started doing some work on it, is that my disease was just lying in wait for me. It's genetic, but it's like any other disease. Certain conditions need to be there. I'll go through that. But in high school, like I said, I was kind of shy. I was painfully shy, elementary school. And then in middle school, like a lot of other females, I've connected with a lot of women, I developed an eating disorder in high school. And I remember, and it's very, very similar to what is just watching other people and saying, why can't I just eat like them? Why do I have to be different? And so I knew something was a little different, but not really. So that happened, and I went to college, and I feel like I thought I had like the same kind of experience with I remember, sometimes it takes getting sober in a few years and work with sponsor to figure out what went wrong.
So I'm going to fast forward. So I went normal life, relatively normal life, went to college, big public college, graduated with a degree in public relations because didn't require math. And it was close enough to being a major in partying as I could get. So I decided to do public relations. Graduated with that, got married right out of college, and started having kids. And life was okay. Life was good. But I'd already established my then husband at the time. We drank pretty regularly, pretty heavily. And, usually I've learned that a lot of times partners do that. Alcoholic partners kind of do that. So we started relying pretty heavily on alcohol pretty early on. But I started having kids, and that diffused a little bit, but there was still that underlying issue. I'd always I'd have the kids, and then, I'd go back to having some drinks at night. And so he was working, and I was staying home with kids, and I was in this mom group. And a lot of, I'll see it on Facebook or social media a lot. It's like these mommy needs her wine and stuff like that. And so I saw that enough, and I was like, yeah, mommy needs her wine. So I would do my thing with the kids and put them to bed and have my wine. And, I started realizing that I would have like 2 glasses, and I'd be like, okay. And then it turned into 3, then it turned into 4. And then I was like, then I'd try to put limits on it. I'd say, well, I'm just going to have 2. And then I didn't have a lot going on. I had a lot of lull time. So idle hands and me don't mix very well. So my drinking really started picking up. But I think it was like 2010, my daughter got very sick. I have 3 children, and I had them bam, bam, bam. And my third child, I got some severe, and I tell this because, I, like you said, if someone hears something that they can relate to with this, great. I experienced some severe postpartum depression, and it came out of nowhere. And I really didn't process it all that well. I went to therapy and I took medication and whatnot, but for a long time afterwards, I wanted to run from that feeling. And a lot of times it would be with alcohol. But in 2010, my daughter, my youngest, she was 3, she got very sick and she had to be hospitalized. The surgeon came in and he was like, listen, she has to have emergency surgery. And that was like the first time in my life I'd ever given it to God. I said, I'm not in control of this. And the relief I felt when I gave it to God at that moment, I was like, oh, wow. Whew, I've never done that before. That feels great. Never did it again until years later. Why? I don't know. But so after that experience, my daughter did fine. I decided that I wanted to go to nursing school. So went to nursing school and had the kids, balancing that. And nursing school went fine. I did start drinking more. So, once there was an element of fear involved. I was in my 30s. I was going back to school. So I'd come home, I'd drink. My ex at the time said it was like he was dating a college student, which I was. But so I graduated from nursing school and got this job, and I really loved it. I love nursing. I still do. But my problem is that I worked nights, and I would get off, not my only problem, but I would get off of work, and I justified it. I'd drink at like 8:00 in the morning. And it got, so like I drink from 8 to 10, and I was like, well, that's people's happy hour, and so I would justify it. And so anyway, it just got worse. It just got worse and worse and worse, to the point that I was drinking all the time. I mean, I was drinking. If I was awake, I was drinking. And with that came the, spiritual bankruptcy. I mean, there towards the end, it was to the point that I couldn't you probably heard it before. I couldn't get a buzz anymore. Nothing worked for me anymore. And kind of the end of it, towards the end of it, I had a seizure. I had a seizure. I had my husband at the time worked out of town a lot. So my alcoholic loved that. And so I would get to be alone with my alcohol. The kids were at school. I'd be alone with my alcohol. And finally, I ended up having a seizure. And I remember I had to be treated by, people that I worked with. And so I had a seizure, and I ended up falling and hitting my head and had a concussion really bad. I ended up waking up with these bright lights shining in my face. And I looked around, and I knew that I was in a trauma bay. And if you know anything about emergency rooms, that's no good. That means mine was bad enough that I was like superseding or right in there with people having heart attacks, So one of my good friends came up to me and they were like, you've had a seizure. And I didn't realize it, but the alcoholic brain in me, it said, oh God, they know now. It wasn't anything, he asked me, he's like, you've had a seizure, and you fell and hit your head. And they asked me a question. They like, tell me your name. And I realized I couldn't talk. And I was like, oh God, I can't even talk. But my brain's still working. And he goes, tell me your kids' names. And I couldn't even remember. And I remember thinking to myself, this is how cunning, baffling, powerful the alcoholic is. And it was like, oh no, they're gonna know now. That's that fear, that self-centered fear. It's like, they're gonna know now my whole alcoholic gig is up, So I had to get, stapled up and hospitalized for this. And I remember as I was leaving, they said, a doctor friend of mine came to me and she's like, look, they have, you need to get help. She's like, would you be okay with going to outpatient care? And I was like, no, 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 no. Don't worry about it. I got this. I can do this myself. Because I'd solved all these other problems in my head. I'd solved all these problems myself. I was like, I can get through this. No big deal. So, so I said no. And I said, well, I can handle this myself. So I got discharged, went home, and I was good for about a week. And I said, I'd said to myself, oh, Becca, this is it. This is your opportunity to get sober. This was God giving you one chance, a tap on the shoulder. But nope, within a week, I was right back at it. At first started back off, at the time I was drinking just tons of Chardonnay, me and Chardonnay all the time. And so it started off, I was like, you know what? I'm not going to do Chardonnay. I'm going to start off with one of these. They had these Bud Light margarita things or whatever they are. I was like, I'm going to do that. So it started off as a little mini one. And then by the end of the week, it was one of the big ones. And then then within a week, I was right back at Chardonnay. So that was in July. And by October, I was in full on just, I call it pickling. And because at that point I was just saturated. That's the only word I can describe myself as, is saturated. Because if I wasn't drinking, I had enough in my system that there was no 24 hours I was making it. So finally in October, I decided, I was like, I think the problem is my marriage. So I was like, I was going to sit my husband at the time down and we were going to have a talk about a divorce. And I sat him down and I was like, okay, it was like 8 a.m. and I'd already been drinking. I was like, I think we need to have a talk. And I think we need to talk about getting a divorce. And he goes, let's talk about the real problem. And he said, let's talk about your drinking. And this is where I say that, like, this was not me talking. This was my higher power talking. This was God talking, because it was not me. I had not planned to make any kind of arrangements that day. Certainly didn't want to admit that I was an alcoholic, because I was in full on denial of that. Problem, yes. Alcoholic, no. He goes, I think we need to talk about you getting help. And I was like, you know what? I do need to get help. So he said, there's a place in right outside of Asheville. And I was like, okay, all right. And he said, I think it's like 6 to 8 weeks. And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. I was like, I can't leave my life for 6 to 8 weeks. But then again, there was that voice in my head that said, you know what, if you don't do this, the rest of your life is going to be, I knew where this was heading. I'm a nurse. I see it all the time. That wasn't enough. If that tells you anything, it's still not enough. I would see people die from this disease, and it wasn't enough for me to acknowledge I needed to get help. And I said, you know what? I do need to get help. So I'd watched enough of that show Intervention to know that as soon as I said I needed to go, I needed to go. I did not need any opportunity to get out of it. So I said, okay, pack my bag, whatever you need to do. Just get me out of here. And I remember I called my mom and I was like, it's time. I have to go get treatment. And she goes, for what? I've been hiding it so well from the, people, even though probably most of the people I dealt with knew. So went to Pavillon, and I really did not know what to expect. But I didn't care. I really did not care, because I just knew I had to get help. And I remember I was like, so I have to live with another woman? And I was like, do we have a TV in our room? I mean, it was just, but I really didn't care. I really didn't. At that point, I would have done just about anything to get sober, because I knew at that point I couldn't live with this. I could not live with alcohol anymore. And I was to the point I couldn't live without it. So I had to do something. I had to do something. And I did, honestly, when I look at that day, I remember thinking to myself, I do not want this to be my legacy. I don't want my children to have to know that this is how their mother went. And so I got there, and I remember I spent a long time in detox. I spent a good week in detox. One of my stipulations for going was that I got to drink. I said, okay, I'll go, no problem, but I need you to get me a box of wine before I go. Cause I was like, this is gonna be my last hurrah with alcohol. And so went in there, and I ended up having to detox for a good, probably a week. But I remember coming out, and I was, it took my brain a long time to get that fog out, a long time. And I say this for the clients there now, is that, a lot of it for me was just going and, being open to whatever they suggested to me, because what I was doing at home was not working. And I would remember sitting in those rooms, and I remember looking up at the walls and reading the readings. And I was like, what is this stuff? And I remember having to go, and I just kept saying to myself, when they would go around the, round robin thing, and everybody had to say something, I'd say, I'm going to trust the process. I'm going to trust the process. And I said it enough, and I said it enough, and I started trusting the process. I did, like, I guess, the 6 to 8 weeks in primary. At that point, I was starting to learn that it was not just me. I went in there thinking maybe I had not even thought about the whole alcohol thing. I mean, I didn't think about the alcoholic part of it. And then I started learning about that it's a disease, and that helped me understand it. And then I started learning about forgiveness of self. And that, because a lot of me wanted to, beat myself up. They said, put down the baseball bat, that you're a sick person. And that helped me so much to understand that, deep down inside, I'm a good person. It was just, I was a very sick person. So did all that, and part of what I did learn too, I remember I was so angry and resentful, and I didn't know it. I got in an argument on the phone. I got to use one of my phone calls, and I called my husband at the time, and we got in an argument. And I remember my counselor said, okay, well, I need you to just go back to your room and process this. And I was like, process it? And that was something I had not done in years, because I'd been so numb. And I did not realize that that's what I've been doing all these years, is just numbing myself. So I went back to my room in primary, and I sat there, and I was like processing it. And it was these feelings I had not felt in so long. And I had to sit there and be uncomfortable with it without having to have anything. I didn't have to have anything. And I could sit there by myself with it. So, and not respond. So that was one of the first times I had encountered any kind of feelings like that in a long time without having to mask it. And me being a licensed professional, one of the things is that they recommended that I stay for the extended care, because most licensing boards will have that you complete a 12-week process if you have any kind of substance abuse issue, or substance use issue. So that was presented to me, and I was like, oh, I don't know. I have like the holidays coming up, because it's right there around Christmas. I was like, I have the holidays coming up, and I just really need to be a part of it. And I remember, I'm not a very good reader, but I would read the daily reflection on a regular basis. And the daily reflection that day happened to be something along the lines of like, holidays can wait, but if you aren't there on an everyday basis for your sobriety, then you're not going to be there for holidays. So what's the use in worrying about it? And I was like, oh my gosh, it speaks to me. So at that point I was like, I decided I was going to stay. So the next step was meeting with my counselor in the extended care. I say that this is one of the best things that anybody's ever done for me. My counselor sat me down, and I was about to enter into the extended care for another, I guess, 6 weeks. And she goes, all right, she's a tough lady from Detroit. And she doesn't mince words. And she said, do you understand that you're an alcoholic? And at that point, I was like, huh, I haven't really been presented with that question. Because do you understand that you cannot drink ever again? And I was like, what? It like hit me like a ton of bricks. You might as well have said I was getting married or something. I mean, I was like, what a commitment. Oh, wow. I had not even thought about that. I guess in the back of my head, I thought that there might be a chance, maybe if I just got my life straight, got my house cleaned up, got my life squared away, that I might could start drinking again. And she goes, no, you understand that you can't ever drink again. I was like, oh, wow. Me, for this alcoholic, one drink to me, the trajectory I was on, death. And I was like, you know what? But before I die, one of my friends says this all the time. Before you die, the alcohol wants you dead, but it'll take you miserable first. And that's absolutely true. And so I said, yes, yeah, I understand that I can't ever drink again. So went to extended care, and it was, I'm really envious of everybody at Pavilion. I know that sounds weird, but when I reflect, it was such a wonderful time because it lets you get to know yourself again and lets you learn stuff about yourself. I mean, it had been so long. I remember being in detox and primary and starting to like shower and feel that warm shower, and then like the eating again. Oh, to eat again. Because there at the end, I wasn't enjoying food at all. I might have made it through some chicken broth, or I'd have to drink to be able to eat. And then I just, push my food around the plate. Oh, that food is fantastic. Number one, well, the food's fantastic anyway, but for that, that was an experience there. So anyway, so it was a magical time for me. And I started learning myself again, had laughed authentically. I had not laughed in so long. It had all been like chemically induced. I'm sure stuff was funny, but it was lots, it just didn't have as much meaning. And so I was in the extended care, and we all went home. We got it coincidentally, it was right there at Christmas. So we all had our times that we got to, I forget what they're planned. It's like planned stays at home for like 2 or 3 days. So, my counselor and I, we sat down and we went through all this, I was going to get a temporary sponsor, this, that, and the other, go home. And my husband at the time was going to pick me up. We'd go home and everything. He didn't come to pick me up. My dad did. And I went back to their house, and it was sprung on me that I was getting hit with a divorce right there during my visit. And so I did. I got hit with divorce papers on my first day back. But I knew, I was like, let me just send my counselor a message. So I sent my friends a message. I was like, hey y'all, plan change, got hit with a divorce. And my counselor said, just don't drink. And thank God, because that wouldn't have helped anything. In fact, it would have made it exponentially worse. So and on top of that, I lost custody of my kids with all of that. Now let me go ahead and tell you, up to that point, I had faced no consequences for drinking, none, except losing myself. But up to that point, I had not lost anything. And so, there I was getting hit with all this stuff. And I remember standing out in the driveway of my home, not being able to go in it. And got handed the keys to my car, nothing else. And I remember, like, you have these God moments, especially for me. I had all these God moments, especially that first year of sobriety. And I remember standing in that driveway. I'm like, well, Becka, you got no house, no husband, no kids. but you do have sobriety, and that's, that's worth a lot. And I was like, if God can get me through that obsession to drink, he can get me through anything. I can deal with this. I'll figure this out. So I got in the car, drove off, and stayed at my parents for a year. And I was able to get my life. I went back to my parents. I still had like 3 weeks of Pavillon left. I still had 3 weeks of extended care left. And my mom was like, you can't go back. What are you going to do? You're getting it. I was like, oh no, I'm going back. I'm finishing this. And so sure enough, I came back, and cutting back being powerful again. Your disease talks to you. I was sitting there by myself, and I said, I could just go to the store right now and pick up a bottle of wine, and nobody'd ever know. I'm probably not getting tested. I'm not doing this. Never. And I was like, you know what? I would know, and God would know. So that to me is evidence. And, I tell people, it's stuff like that that builds your confidence in your sobriety. You're like, I can do this. I can actually make this decision to say no. And so for me, that was life changing. I was like, I was able to say no and hold myself accountable. Whereas, 2 months prior to that, I would have been like, you know what? I'll start again tomorrow. Nobody will ever know, or something. It would have always been me putting it off. I'll do it tomorrow. Or, I've made it this far, let's reward myself. But anyway, so I was able to finish Pavillon, and I will tell you, they gave me like an aftercare plan, and thank God I listened to it, and they told me what to do. They designed like a counselor for me to see afterwards that would help me. It was a recovery specialist, and so I spent a year with her, learning about how my alcoholic talks to me. And while I was there, I've always thought that triggers were going to be like, I remember sitting in her office. I was so proud of it. I was like, you will be so proud. I went to a Mexican restaurant, and I didn't even want a margarita. I looked at all the margaritas. I didn't even want one. She goes, okay, do you understand that that's not how normal people think? I was like, what do you mean? She's like, I look at the chips and salsa. You're scanning the margaritas. She's like, that's, and she was showing me how my alcoholic thinks. And that's one of the beauties of like surrounding yourself with people in recovery, is you learn how, and especially a sponsor, I can't say enough, helps you understand, that you're thinking, that it helps change your perspective on things. You're like, oh, I'll never forget. Like I said, I'm a nurse. I was working with a bunch of other nurses. We see all sorts of crazy stuff, right? And I'm working with them, and this guy was talking. He's like, oh, you'd never believe it. I dated this alcoholic. And, he's talking to a group of us. And I was like, and my ears perk up, and he said, y'all, she would like hide alcohol all over the house. And all these other nurses were like, oh my God, that's crazy. And I was like, yeah, it's super crazy. I mean, you don't understand how, I guess I knew at the time it was probably bizarre, but not to that point. But, so to finish the story, not necessarily finish it, but, I did end up, doing the next right thing, always saying, do the next right thing. I've stayed sober since. Fortunately, and I would highly recommend this to anybody that is presented with this. If there's for part of my licensing, I had to commit to a 5-year program where they monitor you. And that means at any point I could be pulled to do a test. And so for me, it was off the table. Like I didn't have to, it was never, because I knew that if I did anything, even took a Benadryl, it would show up, and I would suffer some pretty serious consequences, whether I'd lose my job, or it could be presented, for personal reasons. So I would definitely recommend that. That ensures that you're, that's off the table unless you really, really just want to give it all up, you know. And what else? So part of my also commitment was I would go to 3 meetings. Now, I'm going to tell you, the first year I probably went to a meeting a day. They say 90 and 90. I went to, sometimes I would book into it. I do one in the morning and one in the evening too. And definitely surrounded myself with people in recovery. That makes a big difference. One of the main things I learned, and what I attribute a lot of my desire to maintain my sobriety and recovery, is that what I learned at Pavilion is my disease can give me purpose. Because I thought to myself, if I could use my experience to help somebody else, whether it's I would not want anybody to have to go through this. So, that's one of my main things, is the purpose that I found in my recovery, and also the connection to other people in the rooms. Not just, you learn about, I had never thought that I was self-centered. That's what I learned at Pavilion. They were, about self-centeredness. And I was like, but I'm not self-centered. I'm a mom, I'm a nurse. They're like, no, that's not what we mean. And you learn the deeper meaning behind that self-centeredness. I was always worried about, it was the fear, all these different fears that were driving my inability to deal with the pain. Whether it's I was overwhelmed, whether it was fear of judgment, whatever it was, I wanted to just numb that, and I would do it at any cost. So I guess that's my main thing. Like I said, I wanted to give an opportunity if there was any questions or anything like that, and so that y'all could do the promises. And the promises do come true. I got my kids back. In fact, and I got promotions at work. I was able to buy a house all on my own. I went back and got a master's degree. So all of these things are doable, but I could not have done it if I did not have, number one, if I was drinking, it was, but the emotional sobriety that I'm given with living in the program. I don't have to fear the public speaking. Now I can go in front of, going for the things that I want to accomplish in life. And that I couldn't even start a bachelor's online, an online program. I was trying to do that and drink at the same time. I couldn't even register. I couldn't even register successfully. So it really, and it all boils down to this. Whenever I start getting overwhelmed, I'm like, oh, I got to do this. I got to do this. I don't have to do anything except just not drink. If I can just do that, everything else, falls under that. I have to maintain that. Otherwise it just, so that keeps me in check. I think that's it. Thanks for letting me share.